Okay. So my name is Lee Hayes Byron, and I am the director at Sarasota County U of IFAS Extension and Sustainability. And we are a partnership between the University of Florida and Sarasota County, and our mission is to bring the science of the university to educate Sarasota County residents and businesses in areas of interest to them. And so we're really proud to do that in 6 core program areas of agriculture, sustainability, gardening and landscaping, natural resources, nutrition and healthy living, and youth development, which holds our 4-H program that hopefully you're familiar with. So we've got a lot of other programs that are available, and I hope that you'll take advantage of them as we move forward. Today, we are here to discuss solar in the Sunshine State. We're going to talk about all of the technologies related to solar and how they apply here in Florida. If you don't mind, take just a minute to put in the chat what interested you in this class, what maybe you wanted to learn, and we can be sure that we address that as we move forward. So what interested you in taking this class? So I'm hearing about people wanting to save energy and harness the sun, interested in if solar can be hurricane proof on a carport. That's I do have a little bit of information on hurricane information related to solar, so we can talk about that, but be sure to raise that question again then if I don't address it. Interesting hearing some mixed messages in Florida about solar, so we'll try to address some of those, maybe some myths, maybe some important discussions that are happening, and then someone interested in solar for pool heating. So we're definitely going to talk about that as well. This is really helpful. Thank you for sharing your areas of interest, and we will continue to move through the presentation, but I do have stops throughout to ask if you have questions, but please also put your questions in the chat as we go, and we can make sure that I take time to address them at those points between topic areas. I also want to let you know that we will be sending this presentation out after the class to those who attended, so you don't need to scramble to take too many notes, because you actually will get the slides along with an evaluation and a request for input on the class itself. So hopefully the slides will be detailed enough. You've got some good information to reference as you go forward. So here's what we're going to try to cover today. We have an important message about addressing energy efficiency first. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits and barriers of solar overall. I'll just mention briefly what Sarasota County is doing, because we like to lead by example. And then we've got some information on each of the 3 types of solar technologies: pool, solar hot water, and solar photovoltaic. And within each of those, we'll talk about return on investment, any incentives and financing that might be out there. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll address some policies and trends and sort of what the future of solar looks like. If we don't get to that, that's okay, because those slides will be in what I send you. Most of what we want to cover today is understanding the technology itself and how to be an informed consumer if you're considering applying it to your residence. This is mostly a residential focused presentation. Much of the information could be useful if you're thinking about it for a business or commercial entity, but there'll be some things that are different, particularly the incentives, which we can cover if you have questions. So hopefully that explains what we're going to do, and I will jump right in. As I said, please don't hesitate to put questions in the chat as we go. So I want to first take a minute to thank some of the organizations that helped pull this together. That includes the Florida Solar Energy Center, several of our local solar contractors, as well as the University of Florida Program for Resource Efficient Communities. They've all sort of provided slides and additional expertise that's helped make this happen several years ago when we developed it, and it's been added to and evolved over time. As I mentioned, I want to share an important message that solar is really beneficial technology, but it is important to start with energy efficiency within your home, so that you don't waste the money you spend on solar on what could have been spent on efficiency, and then you lose that opportunity and you might oversize your solar system. So you want to reduce as much as possible the energy demand in your home, and then think about what kind of solar you might want to apply on top of that. We have a whole workshop called Energy Upgrade that addresses those efficiency opportunities in the home, it takes a deep dive into all the areas of the home where you can save energy and water. So I hope you'll take advantage of that and apply those efficiency strategies in addition to thinking about solar. Now, I often say it doesn't matter to me what brought you here, what interests you in solar specifically. People come to it for a whole variety of reasons. Some people are very interested in it from an energy independence standpoint. Others come to it from an environmental protection goal. Others are looking to address the financial savings that can come from solar and maybe don't care about the other benefits. They're really just looking for financial savings over time for their home. And there are lots of other considerations and benefits. It is a low pollution form of energy creation. It's distributed and has opportunities for resiliency in your home, but we'll talk about some details on that. And then the general concept of minimal maintenance over time, and it's a technology that tends to have a very long lifetime. So a whole lot of benefits there. You might come to it from one or several of those, but I just wanted to share the overall standpoint related to benefits of solar. Now, of course, if there weren't any barriers, everyone would have it. So being very upfront about those. Probably the biggest is that it's a high upfront cost, particularly for photovoltaic modules and the equipment involved, with a longer term benefit that you see financially. So that upfront cost can keep people from making that initial investment, even though over the longer term, it definitely provides savings. So that's the biggest one we hear. There's also this, which is also a benefit, but a barrier related to the low cost of energy in Florida. Other parts of the United States have higher per kilowatt hour costs from their electric utilities. We're fortunate to have low cost here in Florida overall. And so that makes that payback over time a little bit longer. And so that economic value being realized over the longer term can be a challenge. There's also just physical requirements on the buildings themselves. You might have surface area limitations or shading around trees. And that's a site-by-site decision. So some of these can be overcome in various ways, and others, it might mean that it's just not the right place for solar in that particular case. So we'll talk about all those considerations and the questions you might want to ask as you dig into this a little bit deeper. So what is Sarasota County doing? Like I said, we like to lead by example, and we like to show that this is possible on our own facilities before we go out into the community and encourage people to do it in their own context. So Sarasota County has applied both solar hot water and solar photovoltaic systems on our own facilities. There's solar hot water at over 15 locations, including Ed Smith Stadium and several of our fire stations. And we have solar photovoltaic systems at 4 locations now, with a total of over 380 kilowatts installed. And many of these are quite large. My building is this one down here. And that is the Twin Lakes Extension Facility, and we have a 20 kilowatt system there that provides about half of our building's electricity. Sarasota County is also involved in a program called Partners for Green Places, which has over the last several years provided grants to local nonprofits to add solar to their facilities. This is a partnership with several local community and family foundations, which have been very generous in supporting these nonprofits because they've seen the benefit that if you reduce the operating costs for nonprofits, they then can put more of their funds raised to support their mission, whether it be educating low-income children at Children First, providing affordable housing opportunities at Harvest House, and transitional housing for Project 180. So each of these nonprofits has received solar in the last couple years, totaling 166 kilowatts of solar installed. Now, we often get questions of why isn't there more solar in Florida already? You may have come from Massachusetts or California, where there's a lot more solar that you see around the state. And there's a lot of reasons for that we'll get into. But one of them very clearly is policy. So you'll see here that Florida has a very high solar potential. There's a lot of sun that hits our part of the United States, but the pie chart, the small pie chart you can see next to Florida shows that the United States has a pretty small portion of our electricity coming from solar itself. If you look at Germany, which is on the right, you'll see it actually has a much lower solar potential, less sun hitting that country, but a much bigger portion of its energy is coming from solar. And that is largely a policy decision. They have implemented policies that encourage and incentivize this. And we'll talk about that as we go. So the first technology that we'll talk about today is solar pool heating. And I want to share the basics of what this technology is and how it works. And then we will work our way through the other ones as well. Solar pool heating is actually the largest solar market in Florida. It has the most applications of the technology compared to the other two. It is a fairly simple technology that involves plastic panels that are attached to the roof. And they can be retrofitted to an existing pool pump and the piping system. It is important to understand, though, that it's only an energy and a cost savings if you're replacing an existing heater. So otherwise, this is going to provide a very important comfort improvement to your pool. It's going to allow you to swim in warmer water for more months of the year, but it only provides a financial savings if you already have an electric or a gas heater in your pool that you're replacing with the solar. If that's true, it provides really good economic return on investment of sort of 2 to 3 year payback because those pool heaters can be quite expensive. This is what they look like. And it's pretty simple. The thin plastic panels on the roof that the water comes through uses the sun's heat to heat up and then goes back into the pool as warmer water. Another image here of how that looks. And this is how it can be retrofitted to an existing pump system. It uses the pumped water, sends it up in one of those pipes up to the roof. It gets warmed by the black panels, and then the warmer water comes back in and goes back into the pool. Pretty simple system. It can be set up with a timer or with even a temperature gauge that tells it when to send the water to the roof and when not to. In my house, we actually have solar pool heating for our pool. And in the summer, it gets too hot, so we reverse it and we do the panels at night to cool it down a little bit. And in the winter, we do it during the day in order to warm it up. So I'm going to move on to solar water heating, but if you had questions on pool heating, please go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll stop after this technology to answer some questions. Solar water heating is a similar technology that's using the heat of the sun to heat the water. In this case, that water then goes into the home in order to be used in our laundry or dishwashing or showers. So this is internal domestic water heating as opposed to heating the water in a pool. The water heating tank is used just like most water heaters are currently used in homes today. That stores the heated water and then also provides an electronic backup in case it's cloudy or you're using a lot of hot water at that particular time. This is not a new technology. It's been used for decades throughout the United States and internationally. This is an interesting advertisement from 1892 in Baltimore that shows what a solar water heater at that time would have cost $25. What I love to see is what it actually looked like. And on that right image, you can see it's actually not that different from what the panel at my office looks like today. It's certainly some material upgrades, but generally the concept of this technology is pretty consistent, and it's fascinating that it's been used for that long. So this is an older image in Florida over on the East Coast near Miami. The solar panel is here, and then what looks like a chimney is actually a false chimney that is hiding the water tank. So the hot water is pumped to that rooftop tank that then uses gravity to send it into the home. I just love this concept. And this is what they look like now. Like you can see that the tubes here look very similar to the image I showed you from the Baltimore ad. And then you can see it here on a rooftop here in Sarasota County. Very similar to the pool, it sends the cold water in, it gets heated with the heat of the sun, and the hot water goes back into the tank until you need it for use in your home. This is a chart that shows you that hot water typically uses about 15 to 20% of household energy consumption. So that could give you a sense of the kinds of savings you might be looking at if you were to implement it in your home. It's important to think about how many people live in your home. The payback tends to be related to how many people are taking showers and doing laundry and dishes. So the more people in your home, the quicker the payback because you're using more hot water. Like I said, it does have a conventional electric backup. No action by you is required to turn that on. If you're running out of the solar hot water, it will automatically turn on the electric to warm up whatever is left in your tank. In terms of incentives, there is a federal tax credit currently, which provides 30% rebate, a tax credit on your solar water heater purchase and installation. This was just extended with the Inflation Reduction Act, which originally was expiring and now is continued through 2033, which is good news. Most Energy Star related certified solar water heaters qualify. And here in Florida, it is also exempt from sales tax. So you're going to get a little extra 6 or 7% depending on where you live. The links at the bottom here, like I said, you will get this PowerPoint that goes straight to the Energy Star site that outlines these tax credits and gives more information, as well as a payback calculator at the Florida Solar Energy Center's website. This is useful to calculate that concept I was telling you about the number of people in your home can affect when you might see payback on these technologies. So this one, I calculated my family of 4, and it found about an 11-year payback for a solar water heater system in my home, but it would allow you to customize some of those numbers in this calculator to see what it would be like for your home. Okay, I'm going to take a minute to look at the chat and see if y'all have questions there. And if you have more on solar pool heating or solar water heaters, please go ahead and put them in. Let's see. So there's a question about how many kilowatt hours, putting in context, how many kilowatts does a standard home use? Okay, so good question. We will talk about that when we get to the photovoltaic section, but generally a normal single family home might take a 10 kilowatt system. So my office has a 20 kilowatt system because we have 28 people, and that covers about half of our building. But in a home, you're looking at maybe a 10 kilowatt system to cover 90% of your electric usage. I hope that's helpful. We'll get to that as well. All right, and there's a question about the value that gets taxed for property value. Is that going to increase? That's also an interesting point that we'll get to. One of the incentives in Florida is a property tax exemption for solar technologies. So in fact, here, Florida does not increase the value of your home by the value of your solar system, which is an incentive for people to not risk increasing the amount of tax that they pay on their home when they install solar. All right. I don't see any other questions. I'm going to move on, but please feel free to put the questions in the chat as we go. So the third technology is solar photovoltaic, and this is the one that most people tend to be most interested in. It actually generates electricity from the sun. So like I said earlier, the other two are just warming water, either for use in the pool or use in your home. In this case, you are using the panels to really generate electricity that then powers the rest of the items in your home, your appliances, air conditioning, all that. So the systems can be standalone or interact with the utility. And I'll just go over quickly some of the terminology. So a solar cell is the basic building block. It's that small square. The panel is the rectangle of multiple cells. And a system, a solar photovoltaic system, is multiple panels that would be attached to your home or ground mounted in order to provide the power overall. I hope that makes sense. I want to share some other examples and applications of this technology. So, you know, we have solar powered calculators, solar powered cell phone backups. We have the landscape lighting. We certainly use solar as signage, power for signage that might be off grid. So I often ask people, do you use solar? And most people say no, but in reality, many of us are using it on a day-to-day basis. We're just not as aware of it as the large solar systems that we'll talk about today. These are some of the off-grid applications. The lighting that you see there on the right is an interesting application, but just keep in mind that lighting requires batteries because the lighting is most needed at night. Water pumping, however, can be done without batteries and fully off-grid, in this case, usually for an agricultural purpose. But as I think most of us are here to talk about a residential application, this is what a photovoltaic system might look like on top of a single-family home. You can see the connected set of panels, each of which has the cells that we talked about earlier. It can also be integrated into the architecture, and this is here a home in Sarasota, and just beautiful use of the solar panels as a shade provision and also just an architectural feature, really pretty. So where it is interactive with the grid, with the utility, this is how that power gets used within the home. So the PV array is going to generate the electricity, and then it's going to go to an inverter that converts it to power that can actually be used by the home. And that's going to go in and power the loads in the home first. And then anything that's left over beyond what the home needs is going to be sent back out to the distribution system and used by the utility itself. So that's going to be part of what we call net metering, and I'll talk about how that works as well. The point about the inverter is something that's important to understand. People often think of the solar system as just the panels, but the system also includes this inverter that converts from DC power to AC that ends up being used in our homes. So there's several types of inverters. The most common now are what are called micro inverters that allow for the system to provide individual power from each panel, because some of the older inverters actually could shut down the whole system when just one or two of the panels might have been shaded. And so these microinverters allow for different production by the different panels to be captured by the system itself. Inverters tend to have a 10 to 15-year warranty, and the panels themselves tend to have a 20 to 25-year warranty. And the way the panel warranties work is that you get a warranty for a certain percentage of production at the end of that warranty time. So in this case, there's a warranty that 80% will still be being produced by the panels by year 25. It's not saying it'll be exactly the way it was when you bought it, but you're going to still get 80% of the electricity that it was producing in the beginning at the end of that lifetime that they are warrantying. So that's an important thing to understand, and ask any contractor providing you a quote, what are the details of that warranty? Because it might be a 90% production warranty at 20 years or a 70% at 30 years. You want to understand how that all compares. I mentioned net metering, so this is important to understand how it will interact with, in this case, in our region, Florida Power and Light is our utility. So the way this is implemented for FPL is the generation from your panels offset your electric bill. And if you produce more than your home uses in that particular month, that extra carries over to the next month. If you remember the old rollover minutes for cell phone plans, it's sort of like that. And then at the end of 12 months, if you still have an excess of power produced, the utility will pay you for that excess. But it's really important to understand they pay you at their wholesale rate of generation for power, not at the retail rate that you pay. So while we might be paying 11 or 12 or 13 cents per kilowatt hour to FPL, if you have an overage, they're going to pay you maybe 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour, which is what they pay for their generation. So just keep in mind, the lesson here is don't install more capacity than you expect to consume on site, because that overage ends up being a lower value per kilowatt hour than your production. The link at the bottom here in the graphic, you can see, go to FPL's site to explain that net metering, and you can get a lot more information there. All right. So an important point as well is that your production and your usage are going to vary throughout the year. So what your panels produce and what your home requires, it gets to that point of it's really about the total annual production and how that affects your net metering versus a month by month thing. So you can see here, this is someone who in the green has a solar system, and in the blue is the year before they installed their solar system. So you can see what their sort of usage rate is. And on the months they overproduce, those are when the green bars are below, it then rolls over to the next month. So hopefully that is that makes sense, but you want to think about this on an annual basis, not on a month by month basis. All right, so an important change in last year, the Public Service Commission, the PSC, approved FPL to change their rate structure to include a minimum base bill of $25. So that went into effect of June 2022, and it had a particular impact on solar photovoltaic installations, because while there used to be a set of items on your bill that you would pay no matter what, even in those months that you overproduced, that tended to be $9 to $10 per month. Now, with this minimum base bill, you can expect that no matter what, even when you overproduce, you're still going to pay $25 to FPL, plus any of the usage that you have in that month. So they've established this minimum base bill, which can affect that payback over time. So make sure that your contractors that you're getting to provide you quotes include that minimum base bill in their calculations. All right, so we got some questions about hurricanes and what happens in that situation. The first thing I often get asked is if I have solar, am I going to be the house that actually has power and air conditioning when the grid goes out, say after a storm? And it's important to understand the answer to that is actually no, unless you have batteries. The interconnection agreement with FPL and with any utility requires that the system have an automatic shutoff in the time that the grid is down. And that is to protect the line workers, to make sure that when they're out there fixing power for everyone else, your solar system isn't sending power back to the grid that could be very dangerous for those line workers. So if you want to have power when the power goes out from your solar system, you do need to have battery backup in order to store the power that's produced and use it when the grid is out. The sizing of that battery system depends on how much of the items in your home you want to be able to use when the grid is down. So if you just want to have enough power to run a fan and some lights, you can get by with fewer batteries than if you want to run your whole home, including your air conditioner, which is going to require several batteries. So you'll work with your contractor to make those decisions and determine how much of your load you actually need to power. And then how does that affect the budget for those battery purchases? There's also some lower cost options that use solar in order to provide some resiliency after a storm. On the top right is an image of a solar generator. It's certainly quieter and safer than a gas or diesel generator, but it is a bit more expensive and it has a limited capacity. So this was just an example that I was searching for a year or two ago after a storm. I found a solar generator for about $2,000, which would recharge in about 10 hours of sunlight. So you certainly need to be mindful that after a storm, there's a lot of cloud cover usually. So that could affect the ability to recharge, but you would start it with a full battery and then use the panel to recharge after that. And that's going to power a phone, refrigerator, some lights, but not an air conditioner. And then there are these much smaller units, which are just direct solar charging just for items that can be charged on a USB. So that would be a laptop, a phone, maybe a small fan, but not a large appliance. And those are much cheaper and can actually be folded up and are transportable. So we also get questions about, what about hurricanes? Are they going to be safe in the wind that comes with large storms? So all Florida systems have to be designed to withstand hurricane force winds. This is required in the building code, just as your roof would have to meet the building code, so would the panels themselves. And this does vary by region, but generally Florida has high wind uplift requirements for its building code. They do have to be securely fastened to the roof, and that's all managed by inspections. The engineered designs also have to be reviewed and approved by the Florida Solar Energy Center. So this is another layer of protection for ensuring that the systems themselves are designed to be both effective from an engineering standpoint, but also resilient to the forces within Florida. You do want to inform your insurance company that you are getting solar, or certainly ask them what the impact would be if you're considering it. Some people I have talked to said their insurance bill did not go up, and that may have been because they were within a threshold of coverage. But some people have said that their insurance policy did go up, and that it was important that they had talked to their provider beforehand to understand that. There have been some news articles about people getting dropped from their insurance when they add solar to their home. And I've talked to some solar contractors who have shared that the examples they were aware of were for very large systems, but that generally solar shouldn't be a reason to get dropped from your insurance company. And if you are, in some cases, they're the kinds of companies that are trying to reduce their policies within Florida anyway, and they might be looking for reasons to do that and find other ones beyond just solar. So those are what I'm hearing within the industry, but it is something to be aware of and cautious of. The insurance industry here is quite complicated at the moment. In the top right is an image that is Tyndall Air Force Base after Hurricane Michael in the Panhandle. And there was some really interesting data that came out of that actually showed that the homes at Tyndall Air Force Base that had solar installed, the sides with solar installed in many cases fared better than the sides that didn't have solar installed. So that's not necessarily always going to be true, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it provides an extra layer of protection that was really interesting. Okay, so on the incentive side, I want to share the same federal tax credit that was just extended. It provides 30% of the cost for the photovoltaic system. It's important to know that these are big investments, and you have to pay enough taxes to then get the credit off of that base tax rate that you're paying. There are now direct pay provisions for nonprofits. This is not for residential purposes, but important for people to understand, which used to be a barrier for nonprofits to apply solar. There are some incentives for that now as well. As I said, in Florida, solar is also exempt from sales tax, which gets you that extra reduction off the cost. And the residential property exemption provides that reduced property tax by not increasing your property tax bill by the amount of the value of the solar system. Hope that makes sense. So in other words, if you have a $300,000 home and you add a $25,000 solar system to it, the assessment for your home is going to stay at $300,000. Okay, so incentives change all the time, and this is the best resource out there for keeping track of what those incentives might be. It's called the Database of State Incentives for Renewable Energy, and the site is dsireusa.org. And you can click on where you live and the technology that you're interested in, and then it'll pull up several programs that match that. They're not all going to be financial incentives. They might be other programs related to education or other things, but it'll give you a sense of the full set of programs that are out there that you might be able to take advantage of. All right, I'm going to take a minute to pause and look at the questions in the chat, and then we'll jump into some site considerations. Let's see. So the metal roof, we don't want to puncture through for panels. What are freestanding hurricane-proof options? Good point. Metal roofs are actually some of the better types to add solar to, because they can use the seams of the metal roof to attach them without penetrations. So these standing seam roofs can be applied solar if they are the right width apart in some cases, but in most cases, metal roofs are the easiest to apply solar to. And they are also the best for hurricane strength as well. So that should put you in a good position. and you'll want to talk to your contractor about the different ways of attaching the panels to the roofs. Some require roof penetrations and some don't, but they are all supposed to do it in a way that maintains the integrity of your roof, but that is certainly a thing to keep an eye on. Let's see, would solar have an effect on property insurance? We talked about that. Definitely want to reach out to your insurance provider and talk to them about it before you do it. But generally it shouldn't necessarily raise your rates, but it does have the possibility to. So talk to them in advance. The next question is, does Peace River Electric Cooperative, I think is the full name, have the same policy as FPL? And I used to know that, and the answer was it was similar. But this was several years ago and I haven't looked into it since. And several of the utilities have changed their net metering approaches. So I would encourage you to reach out to Peace River and ask them what their current policies are. So some of the co-ops, particularly in the Panhandle, have changed their net metering policies to be actually detrimental to the payback for solar. So definitely check with your utility if you're not in FPL territory and understand their net metering policy. The question that's next is, how many hours of sunlight per day does a home need, and how does that affect the rainy season? So I would say I don't have a specific answer on the number of hours, but certainly the rainy season, the cloudy time of year, can affect production. So that's why when I showed you that annual graph, you see the production go up and down throughout the year. Much of that is related to cloud cover. But it balances out, right? So that the sunny parts of the year produce more. And because it does that month to month rollover in the net metering system, it really balances out, and the cloudy days are balanced by the sunny days. And yes, I will definitely provide a copy of the slides as long as you're registered and we have your email address. We will be sending these out when we send out an evaluation in the next day or so. Great. All right, good questions, everyone. Thank you. Please keep them coming, and I'm going to move on to the next section, which is going to talk about specific site considerations. So your particular home needs to be evaluated for, is it the right place to install solar? And that might be affected by the orientation of your roof. Which way is the roof facing? It is best in Florida to be facing to the west or southwest. And that's going to get you the greatest sun exposure. But it can be put on the less sunny side of your roof. It's just going to produce less. So the value per panel is less if you're on the shady side of the roof. Similarly, if you have a tree that shades a part of your roof, they're going to try to avoid that part of the roof and put the panels on the sunny parts. And if that tends to be the sunnier side of your house, that limits the amount of space that you have that provides that maximum sun exposure. Again, that doesn't mean you can't put it there. It just reduces the production depending on where the sun is greatest, or least. The age of your roof is important to think about. And by that, I mean, if you are within, say, 5 years of needing to replace your roof, you might want to wait or expedite the roof replacement, or wait until you're ready to do that to put the solar on. Because when someone comes out to replace your roof, you're going to have to pay someone else to come out, take the solar panels off, put them aside until the new roof is on, and then they come back and put the solar panels on the new roof. So to avoid that extra cost, or even if it's the same company, they're going to charge you more in order to do that, you might want to wait until you're putting a new roof on and then do it all together. Let's see, we talked about shading. This energy use on a single meter is a pretty small detail, but it matters in a big way for a small number of people. So I'll explain it this way. There was a home out east in the rural Sarasota that put solar on their barn because that was the roof that was getting the greatest amount of sunlight. But it was a separate meter to their FPL account, and FPL will only apply the value of the solar in the net metering to the meter it's attached to. It won't combine it to the house meter. In this case, it only offset the power being used by the barn. So just be sure that you attach the solar to the meter that is using the most power in your set of buildings. That's going to be less common for most of us, but certainly something to be aware of. We talked to people about, do you expect to stay in your home? Because these are long-term investments. You don't have to stay in your home. There is some information later in the presentation about the value that solar brings when you sell your home. But certainly if you're making this investment, you'd want to think about, is this something that I'm going to take advantage of, or do I need to recoup the cost when I sell it in a shorter amount of time? The sizing of the system is mostly going to be driven by the annual electricity use, but you also want to think about what kind of efficiencies might you do in the future. Like if you expect to change out windows or upgrade your air conditioning system and you're not doing it now, but you know you're going to do it in the near future, you don't want to forget that when you're thinking about sizing of your solar system, because you actually are then going to use less electricity in the future than you're using now. So again, we don't want to oversize the system to avoid that net metering overage value differential. The next bullet there talks about FPL has a tiered system where if you go over a 10 kilowatt system, it triggers some additional requirements for liability insurance, as well as some additional fees when you're doing the interconnection agreements with FPL. So smaller systems have lower insurance requirements, some less steps involved with FPL. So that's a trade-off you'll want to think about when you're sizing your system as well. Okay, I know this is a lot of information, but like I said, I'm going to send you the slides and just put your questions in the chat as you have them. So I know everyone's heard about the inflation that's happening across our economy, as well as some of the supply chain issues that have happened in the last couple of years. And solar is not unique. They are also, this technology has also been the subject of several of those challenges. So there have been price increases in solar, which had traditionally in the last 15 years, the prices have been going down. Inflation has affected that in the last couple of years, so the prices have inched back up, and they have had some supply chain issues, just like many other manufacturing types. There's also some international considerations. The Commerce Department is investigating some tariff interventions by international manufacturers, and so there have been some price changes as a result of that, and that's in the works currently. Really, it's meant to protect domestic manufacturers, but has had some impacts on prices. There is also a little bit of policy uncertainty. This was more true last year because there was state legislation that was targeting net metering policies and in a negative way that would have made it less financially viable to have solar. That did not go through the state legislation, but there's always this question of will there be additional policy put in place that might affect the existing systems or the future systems. So just keep an eye on state legislation related to this, and your solar contractors will be very familiar with this. And then there's always the question of what is this a utility going to do in terms of prices of electricity, because that affects your return on investment. For a long time, FPL's rates were flat. There were no increases. And then in the last 3 or 4 years, there have been pretty significant increases. So that affects that return on investment calculation. All right. The Inflation Reduction Act was a significant increase in the incentives related to solar. So while the first market challenges were possibly a difficulty, the Inflation Reduction Act has really provided some good benefits for solar. There's a couple of really cool online tools that you can play with to get a sense of what your specific home might look like before you make some calls to solar contractors to get specific quotes. The one on the left is from Google. It's called Project Sunroof, and you put your address in the tool and it'll give you a sense of the potential production based on how much of your home your roof is shaded versus sun exposed. You can see in this image, the one with the pin actually has a lot of shading and the one right above it has none. And so Google Sunroof is going to calculate the potential solar investment and production rate differently for those two homes. Similarly, PV Watts is from the National Renewable Energy Lab, and this is a much more detailed tool that provides similar information about expected solar radiation at your particular address, as well as the value of the production. And this is something that some of the solar contractors use. So you can play around with both of these tools, get a sense of what your particular home looks like, and then make some calls and get quotes from contractors. I've said that several times, and I want to reiterate, we really encourage you to get multiple quotes from contractors, really understand, compare apples to apples as much as you can. But it's really going to be difficult because different contractors have different relationships with different manufacturers. So you want to do your homework, understand what the solar company that gave you the lower quote, what does that mean? What kind of panels are they providing? What kind of history do they have in our community in installing solar? Understand and compare as an informed consumer. So you're going to want to look at the years of experience of that particular contractor, the number of local installations, but go beyond that and ask them the number of local installations of the type of solar you're doing. So some contractors specialize in solar hot water and others specialize in solar photovoltaic. So you want to know, for the thing that you are getting quote on, what is their background and experience? There is a solar contractor's license, which you can look up at myfloridalicense.com, but they can install solar without that license. So they can install photovoltaic with an electrical license. They can install solar hot water with a plumbing license. That solar license just goes that extra step and shows that they've had additional training. Similarly, there are some industry standards. This NABCEP solar heating, solar photovoltaic or heating installer certification shows that they've gone an extra step and gotten additional training. And just like with any contractor, you want to look at reputation and reviews, workers' compensation and liability insurance, and the kind of equipment that they are offering you and how that compares to others. I have several quotes here, but these have been provided over the years from various contractors, so please don't take these as the actual costs. It's just meant to give you a sense of the considerations and the payback at the time that these quotes were provided. So Region Solar gave this quote back in 2021. It was for a 9.8 kilowatt system, which represented 28 panels. And they did apply the federal tax credit, which left them with a net actual cost of $16,300. With a savings per year of about $1,900. So that's a strict payback period of about 8 years. And that has gone down over the years. When I first started teaching this class, it was 13, 14 years. This was a base system on a shingle roof, and it assumed a 3% annual rate of inflation of electric rates. So that's one of the questions you want to ask the contractors, or what are the assumptions you're putting into these savings numbers over time? Harriman Solar provided me this quote back in 2019, again, not meant to represent the actual cost, just to give you a sense of the system. This was a 10 kilowatt system that they applied the tax credit to, and they were getting a savings per year of about $300 to $400 and a payback period of 25 years. And what's different here is that they financed it. So if you don't have the cash up front to pay for this out of pocket, you certainly can finance it. But that cost of capital is then going to reduce your payback period depending on what the interest rate is and how long that term is in place. So I wanted to share this one as an example of what a finance system might look like and how that affects that payback period. It still provides savings over time, but just less. This is a much older quote, but it's the one that includes a battery backup. So in this case, it includes an 8 kilowatt system with 1 Tesla Powerwall, and that came in at $30,000 at the time. They did apply the tax credit, and then they were getting annual savings. But the battery doesn't provide savings; it just provides that resiliency that we talked about earlier, and it gives you a sense of what that battery would cover. All right, I'm going to do just a couple more slides and then answer your questions because we're getting close to our time. I talked a little bit about financing and just wanted to share some of these options. The cash sort of upfront payment is going to be the least cost in terms of cost of capital, but not everyone has that, and you may choose not to do that. So there's several other options. A solar co-op isn't really a financing option, it's a bulk buy option that was done in 2020 and 2021 by Solar United Neighbors. It's a nonprofit that organizes solar co-ops across the country. Those were the last ones they did here in Sarasota, but you might want to reach out to them and ask if they're planning to do another one. In this case, multiple people come together to do a bulk purchase, and they get one contractor who does several installations across the county. There are some refinancing or second mortgage options that provide specific energy financing, and that gives you a little bit lower interest rate for that energy investment on your home. You can also look into home equity lines, but again, you have to have equity in the home in order to qualify. There are some loans, in this case, an example I found from Seacoast Bank that is a 6 to 10 year term. It doesn't require equity. It does require good credit, and it would be unsecured, but you need to pay it back when you sell the home. So there are some unsecured loans that are going to have higher interest rates that you might want to look into. And then there's a product called Property Assessed Clean Energy that is available here in Sarasota County. It tends to have a 6 to 9% interest rate. And it's not a loan, but it's actually a property assessment. So you pay it back through your property taxes. So several options here. But again, whenever you are financing, you have to include that interest or repayment fees on top of the cost of the system when calculating your return on investment. There is also a program from Florida Power and Light called Solar Together, and this is what they call community solar, where they install solar systems and then you pay into the system on your bill, and over time they provide some savings back to you. They were on a wait list for a little while, and now they do have the opportunity to apply to be a part of this program. There's a lot of detail here on the slide. I'll let you do some research if you're interested in this as an alternative to on-site solar, but the program is back to accepting applications if you're interested. And then I think this is the last one I'll do before answering your questions. There was a study about, do solar systems pay back when you sell the home? And they did these compared appraisals of 43 pairs of homes with and without solar, and included 4 pairs that were here in Northport and Lakewood Ranch. And they did find that there was a 6.39% increase in the sale price of the homes that had installed solar systems. And so that was a boost in the sale price of between $10,000 and $22,000. An important detail here, of course, is it depends on the market. So if we are in a down housing market, you can't rely on that increased value. So just be really careful about that. But in general, there is increased value in the solar systems. You just have to make sure that the housing market itself will support that. All right, so I'm going to pause there and look at the questions. Let's see. There was a question is there a standalone system for residential use instead of putting the system on a roof? If I'm understanding your question correctly, it is absolutely possible to do ground mounted system rather than putting on the roof. In fact, our county owned building out east, the County Operations Center, has a ground mounted system. It requires a structure and it has to meet hurricane code just like the roof does. But it certainly can be used if you have room on your property for that, and it avoids the concerns that sometimes come with the roof. So yes, that is possible. The financing point. So the question is, the first slide showed a payback of 8 years and the financing slide showed a payback of 25 years. And yes, that's what those calculations showed, but those are old quotes and an old interest rate on the financing. So it is just meant to illustrate that difference in that cost of capital. And you'll want to talk to your contractors about what could they offer, and then also talk to your bank or your financial advisor and see what other options they might know about to finance a system beyond what the contractors could offer you. So contractors do usually provide financing, but it might be unsecured financing that has a pretty high interest rate. So you'll want to talk to a bank and see what they might be able to offer you as well. And then that home style energy program is actually a federal mortgage program, which you could talk to a mortgage broker about and see if they can offer you essentially a second mortgage specifically with an energy intent. And those tend to have a little bit lower interest rates as well. So it doesn't have to put the return on investment that far out, depends on the interest rate and the terms and the fees and all those things. So don't mean to scare you away, But it's certainly important to understand that cost of capital. Good. Such good discussion. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you coming, and feel free to reach out if you have other questions. Have a great day.